before he attempts to write something, right? So there are a couple of things. First is that there is a need for, so brainstorming is very essential because it helps to prepare the points and to organize your content, right? So here it will be about understanding the demand of the question. What is the demand of the question? Then it is also about breaking the question into its various parts and subparts, right? So it's also about deconstructing the question or breaking the question. So we need to break the question as well into various subparts. And then we also need to prioritize which points are we going to write more and which points we are going to just touch upon. When you are answering a geography question, it needs to have some geography terms like precipitation, cloudburst. When you are writing a polity question, it needs to have terms like articles, it needs to have some case laws. When you are writing a question from Indian economy, it needs to have some data, some statistics, some examples, some schemes, right? So again, it needs to be subject-specific value addition. Hello everyone, I'm Pratik and I'll be discussing and analyzing the topper's answer script of Rishabh Choudhary, okay? Rishabh Choudhary secured an All India rank of 28 in this year's UPSC CSE 2024. And in today's discussion, we will be looking into his answer script and try to identify some of the important patterns that can help you improve your answer writing. So we will be discussing his answer from various perspectives, from the way he has introduced his answer, from the content that he has mentioned, and also the kind of value addition that he has provided in his answers. We'll also try to look into the structural part in terms of how he has divided his content into various segments, and we'll also look into the kind of data that he's pulled, right? And the kind of value enrichment he has provided. And finally, we will also look into the presentation parts, right? So the approach for today's discussion would be such that I will be taking one question from his answer script, and you are supposed to ideally take a pause of 10 minutes before attempting or listening to the discussion, right? So I'll be displaying the question to you, and you must take a pause of 10 minutes, pause the video for 10 minutes, and then you listen to the discussion. And in that moment, try to write the answer to the best of your ability. Okay, so this is the question that I'm displaying. The question is, the principle of Panchsheel and non-alignment aided India in maneuvering the Cold War era. Discuss, answer in 150 words, and the marks allotted is 10. Okay, so pause the video now, attempt this question, and then watch it after 10 minutes. Okay, so let's start the discussion. So before we start it, like, what are the various principles that you need to understand here, okay? So what goes inside the mind of a topper before he attempts to write something, right? So there are a couple of things. First is that there is a need for brainstorming. So brainstorming is very essential because it helps to prepare the points and to organize your content, right? So here it will be about understanding the demand of the question. What is the demand of the question? Then it is also about breaking the question into its various parts and subparts, right? So it's also about deconstructing the question or breaking the question. So we need to break the question as well into various subparts. And then we also need to prioritize which points are we going to write more and which points we are going to just touch upon. Since this is a question of 10 mark, the word limit is 150, so we need to directly hit on whatever is asked in this question, right? So this is the brainstorming part. Then we'll talk about the organization. This will include the structure of the question. So this includes how do you plan your introduction, what aspects will you put in the body, what data can you recall, what current affairs, what schemes, what events can you recall, and then finally, how would you conclude this question? Then it will also include various value enrichment. Right? The third part that we'll be looking into is part of content. So with regard to content, what is very important is that we are sticking with the demand of the question. So we are only writing the specific content. So we need to understand the demand of the question and provide the specific content. And how do you provide specific content? It is by providing the subject specific aspects. For example, when you are answering a geography question, it needs to have some geography terms like precipitation, cloudburst. When you are writing a polity question, it needs to have terms like articles, it needs to have some case laws. When you are writing a question from Indian economy, it needs to have some data, some statistics, some examples, some schemes, right? So again, it needs to be subject-specific value addition, right? So this is what you are supposed to do, subject-specific value addition. And of course, you can also provide other aspects as well in terms of presentation. So that would be the most important part. So how do you write your answer? How do you present your answer to the examiner? So what kind of impression does the examiner get after reading your answer? So this is all about presentation in terms of whether it is in bullet form or paragraph form. Then how have you highlighted your point? So it can be in terms of underlining, or it can be about drawing a box. So these are the two most prominent ways in which you can draw your attention to the examiner about a specific aspect, right? So you may have written a very important statistics, very important case studies, but if you have not highlighted that part, then the examiner will definitely miss out on that part, right? Then also you need to make some diagrams, some schematics. So diagram can be in terms of any hub and spoke model, or in terms of any flow chart, or any way in which you are explaining things in a table format. So again, it is different ways of presentation, not just in the textual format, but using some other format, right? That makes for a relief to the examiner whenever he is answering or whenever he is evaluating your answer. So with that being said, let us now move towards the approach that Mr. Rishabh has taken to address this question, okay? So the question is the principles of Panchsheel and non-alignment. So he has underlined these two words because these two words are the key word, right? So here we have to identify how Panchsheel on one hand and non-alignment. Now you should notice that it is not talking about non-alignment movement, it is talking about non-alignment. So non-alignment is a principle, and non-alignment movement is like a sort of an organization, right? It's a formal cooperation. So here, how are these things helping India in Cold War, maneuvering Cold War? So here you have to talk about all these various ways, okay? So essentially this came as part of question from post-independence India, history of India, or from GS1, but equally this can also come as part of your GS2 paper or from international relations, okay? So let's take a look at what the topper has done here. So as we mentioned, we'll be looking at it from the perspective of, say, brainstorming, then in terms of organization of point, then in terms of structure, and then in terms of presentation. So 4 aspects we will be looking. Presentation, right? So there are 4 major aspects that we'll be looking into. So first, brainstorming. Brainstorming means what exactly you are supposed to write here. So he has first talked about this policies of non-alignment and Panchsheel were brought to protect the sovereignty and external interference in domestic affairs during Cold War. So this is the introduction. So in the introduction is basically about context, or it is talking about the purpose behind following Panchsheel and non-alignment. So at this point of time, he has not explained what exactly is the meaning. So he has started with the reason why it was introduced. Then he has explained the meaning of Panchsheel and explained the meaning of non-alignment. Then he has used one subheading where he has mentioned aided India in maneuvering Cold War. So this is the subheading which talks about how it has helped India in maneuvering Cold War, and he has given 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 points, and then he has given a conclusion. Okay, so this is what would have come into his mind before even attempting the question. That first he will talk about the relevance. What exactly is the relevance here of Panchashil and non-alignment? Then what exactly is the meaning of these two terms? Then how did they help in Cold War? And finally, what was it all about? So its conclusion here is, you can say that it is an evergreen principle, means that its relevance in present context. Okay, fine. So this is, we are done. Brainstorming means identifying the number of parts of the question and how you proceed with that, your answer. So that is done. Then organization will include dividing your question into 3 parts: introduction, body, and conclusion. So introduction we have seen. This is a context-based introduction, or it talks about the purpose behind non-alignment and Panchsheel. So what is the purpose? It was brought to protect the sovereignty and extended an external interference in domestic affair during Cold War, right? And then he has explained the meaning of Panchasheel, all these: mutual respect and equality, non-interference in internal affairs, respect for territorial sovereignty and integrity, peaceful coexistence, mutual non-aggression. And then what exactly is non-alignment? Not aligning to either USA or USSR during Cold War. So this can be considered as a very holistic introduction. Maybe he could have given for a smaller introduction as well, but again, it's a good thing that he has clarified what exactly he understands by it. Okay, and then in the conclusion, you can see that this is talking about the relevance, as we have discussed. So non-alignment and Panchsheel principles are evergreen principles. Today's world of emerging US-China rivalry demands careful maneuvering by applying these principles, right? So again, he has talked about how they are still relevant. So this is the conclusion about relevance. Now, how else you could have written a different introduction? This is a good introduction, but again, you can also have given introduction in the form of a quote-based introduction. It could be a quote-based. Here you could talk about, in terms of Jawaharlal Nehru's quote about non-alignment. That non-alignment to us is not about neutrality. It's about principled approach, something like that. Or you can talk about some current affairs-based introduction, whereby there has been reset in the ties of India and China, right? So now you can say that it shows the enduring importance of the Panchsheel principle. Or maybe you can talk about the Bandung principles or the Bandung conference in 1955, of which it was the 70th anniversary, right? So you can also talk about that as well. So the point is that you can use quote-based introduction. You can start with the current affairs-based introduction, or maybe you can also start with any definition-based, which what the topper has done here. In terms of conclusion, this is a good conclusion because it talks about the relevance, but you could also have gone for, again, a current affairs-based conclusion, or you could have gone for a quote-based conclusion. That would also be very effective, fine. And this is what he has written in the body. Again, here there is only one component, right? So he has not provided multiple perspectives, just one perspective. So we are done with this as well. Organization, structuring, and this is content, the third part. So in terms of content, let's take a look at what he has written in the body. Aided India in maneuvering Cold War, how? Prevented independence and power rivalry, and prevented power rivalry in South Asia, right? So it was prevented in India, that is correct. Then it is for line for India's self-interest to deal with security challenges. So basically, non-alignment and Panchsheel basically were in alignment with India's self-interest. How? Because it helped India deal with security challenges. And here he has given two examples. So US came to India's aid during the 1962 war with China. One of the reasons was because India was non-aligned with any of the countries. And similarly, USSR came to India's aid during 1971 because India again was non-aligned as such. So even though India has a friendship treaty with USSR at this point of time, but still it gave USSR a significant bandwidth to come to India's aid because of that reason. Third, promotion of international peace and decolonization. So this is the impact, not because it did not just have a very narrow national interest, it also had a very enlightened national interest. How? Because it led to promotion of decolonization of Africa, South-South cooperation. Example, the Korean Peace Resolution in UNSC. Then fourth is maintain harmonious relationship with all the countries, right? So again, it helped us to be looked at as a person who can bring different warring factions at table. Developing India's informal capability by 5-year plans, right? So again, a lot of countries contributed here because they did not look to, or they wanted to have India closer to them, right? So these are some of the way in which he has mentioned it, and it is through examples, through various cases, he has explained his content. So content is very specific to what is asked. It is very targeted, and it is also full of examples. Okay, fine. Then when it comes to presentation, as such, there is no diagram here. Okay, so maybe what you could have done, like in the hindsight, because maybe during that time it may not occur to you, but maybe you could draw a diagram of say world map, and then you can show wherever there was major non-alignment movement principle took place or NAM movement took place. Maybe you could have also shown the various principles of Panchsheel through say a hub and spoke model, and he has here used this approach that he has again given all these principles here, so that is clearly visible, right? Then again, as we can see that all the keywords are properly underlined, all the arguments are given a specific number, okay? And it appears very neat and clean. It's very easier on the eyes. You are able to understand it very clearly. So the presentation aspect is also fine, okay? Right. So I think this is all about what I wanted to talk about when it comes to this particular question. Now you tell me how can we further add value to this question, right? So this is how we will approach the deconstructions of Topper's copy. We'll again come back with another video. Till then, take care.